So can white people have an opinion on this? Of course they can. You are witnessing an interaction between someone who has offended someone else. You have no vested interest in their relationship, and yet you want to insert your own opinion as to whether they should be offended or they should not, or they should accept an apology or they should not. Hi gang. So in this video, I want to talk about Natasha Denona's apology on her Instagram page regarding the eyeliner tutorial that she did on an East Asian model. If you're not up to speed on that issue, I have a video about that. I will link it somewhere. In that video, I go more in depth into exactly what happened and my personal thoughts. But here's a short recap. Sephora, in collaboration with Natasha Denona, who is a makeup artist and also a makeup brand, she named a brand after herself, posted a tutorial video on how to do eyeliner on an East Asian model and referred to the model's eyes as being monolided. Natasha Denona also posted, I think, a part of that tutorial onto her Instagram and received some criticism for it. So there were 3 issues with the post. 1, the model's eyes were not monolided as the description claimed. Second, a lot of East Asians either disliked the style that was presented on the model and or felt that it was a misrepresentation of how most East Asians prefer to do their eye makeup. And number 3, which I think is the thing that tipped everything over the edge, was Natasha Denona's comment saying, "Thanks, the whole point is to inspire you because you don't do it." So many people felt that she was being patronizing, and for some people they felt that she was being racist because she was talking down to an East Asian person, and based on the comment section disregarding the voices of East Asian people. My personal opinion is that I don't think the post nor her response was racially motivated, and you can look at my original video for my reasoning as to why. Again, disclaimer, I am an East Asian person. However, my opinion is not reflective of the entire communities. I know a lot of East Asian people in the comment, based on their comments, found this as being racist. For those of you who don't know this, I am of Chinese descent. I am also partially of Javanese descent, but primarily Chinese. I come from a country called Singapore, which is in Southeast Asia. We have a history of being colonized by the British. I think I have a slightly unique perspective because I've lived a majority of my life in Singapore, in which my ethnic group is the majority ethnic group. And I moved here to Germany about 7 years ago. Now I'm going to read out Natasha Denona's apology. So she posted this on the 19th of June 2022, which was yesterday at the time of this filming. She said, "I would like to sincerely apologize to everyone who was hurt by my recent eyeliner tutorial and response in the video's comment section. On June 11th, I posted a tutorial video about eyeliner on Instagram. It saddens and frustrates me to know that the Asian community was offended because of me and my video. At the very beginning, I tried to explain that this video came from an artistic point of view. However, over the past few days, I have learned more and more from all of your feedback that it could be discriminatory towards the Asian community. As the founder of the Natasha Denona brand, it is of the utmost importance for me to share the true values of my brand and stay inclusive to all. I have become increasingly and deeply aware of how offensive and inappropriate this type of makeup content can be. Again, I am truly sorry. My brand and I have always believed that beauty is diverse. It shall not be defined by stereotypes, and we will continue to understand and respect the beauty of others. From here on, Natasha Denona Beauty and I will be certain to stay educated on topics of racial stereotyping. I hope the Natasha Denona fans and beauty experts who love and support the brand will continue to help us to spread the true meaning of beauty that is representative of all. I hope we can work together to continue creating valuable and meaningful beauty content for the world. Thank you to everyone for alerting me to this issue and helping me stay educated. Much love, Natasha Denona. I read the apology and I thought it was fine. I accepted it. I didn't have a problem with it. So here are some comments from people who, based on their image, appear to be not East Asian. Okay. So one person says equality. It doesn't matter what anyone does anymore. Someone will always feel offended. We are trying so hard to please everyone nowadays, and it's just not possible. Everyone needs to stop complaining about every single thing and stop being so damn sensitive. Stop reading into everything, trying to make a big deal of it. Big deal out of it and crying racism. A nice beauty product comes out and right away I see comments, and I don't know what she's trying to say here, but I'm assuming the world's gotten so out of hand. If we are all equal, then we need to stop trying to make every single race stand out as their own. Another person says, there was nothing offensive about your eyeliner tutorial. People are nowadays offended of anything and try to attack anyone. I am so sorry we live in such intolerance and craziness where artists need to apologize for their creativity. Please keep doing your makeup tutorials and inspire us to create new looks out of our comfort zone. I myself rarely wear liquid liner, etc. Okay. I love all your products, especially eyeshadow and blushes. I will always keep buying from your brand. I do apologize and feel bad you had to deal with this crazy mob. Please know that not all your customers are that ignorant, and we do appreciate your creative work. I am again looking forward to your next tutorial and new launches. Again, I am sorry for what happened to you. Another person says, I viewed the post from 11th of June and I still don't understand why the makeup look offended people. I paid attention to Natasha's wording from that post as well. In no way did she say anything offensive in my eyes. If anyone would like to enlighten me on that, feel free. Another person says, oh my God, people are so sensitive anymore. Now, in response to that, there was a lot of unhappiness, and understandably so. From my perspective, understandably so. I think you need to give credence to the affected group. I think you need to give credence to the people that were offended. So here are some comments from what I assume are people of East Asian descent. Asian people, it's racism and we are offended. Natasha, I apologize. White people under this post. It's not racism. Asians, stop feeling offended because we white see and say in this way. Period. So typical. If you're not offended, then this letter is not for you. Period. Someone else says, love the comment section. Obsessed with how white people just comment on behalf of Asians to say that Asians are overreacting. Thank you for all the Karens in the comment section to forgive on Asians' behalf. Another person says, take ownership of your words and actions and don't form your apology around how the Asian community responded versus how your actions were offensive. It wasn't just the tutorial itself, but ignorance involved in attempting to portray monolid eyeliner on someone who didn't have monolids and didn't take into account how it would look on someone who did have monolids. Also, we don't need people who aren't Asian accepting the apology in the comments or excusing what happened. Stop belittling things and excusing it away as though we can't care about multiple things at the same time. The funniest thing in the comments is white people on behalf of Asians to say they are not being offended. Wait, are white people being offended? So this brings me to another interesting point. Someone said, so are you saying that racism is not offensive unless it offends you personally? I think racism is racism regardless of whether it's towards me or someone else. I'm equally offended by it. So I think in some ways that logic kind of makes sense. Here I think there is a contention which I don't think has really been brought up a lot in conversation. Realistically, people that are not of the affected group, so in this instance, it would be people who are not of East Asian descent. Realistically, these people can have opinions on the matter. They have a mind, they can think, they can understand the concept of racism. They have their own personal thresholds as to what they think is an offensive comment, and they can observe a situation, assess it, and see if it fits into their own definition of racism, what is offensive, etc., etc. And I also think they could be offended when they see something offensive happening to someone else. They could be upset at what they are witnessing. They could be outraged. If you've ever seen the show What Would You Do? That's the whole premise. It's to recreate an uncomfortable situation and see how people in public spaces react to that situation. However, I would liken this situation, especially when it comes to an apology coming from a major brand. To simplify this into an example, there's this person called Abigail. And I have some sort of a relationship with Abigail. And then there's this person called Bianca, has some sort of a relationship with Abigail, but I don't actually know Bianca. And one day I witnessed that they're having a conversation. I witnessed Abigail saying something potentially offensive to Bianca. Bianca could say, that was offensive to me and I didn't like what you said. She could say, that made me uncomfortable, but it's not a huge deal. And then Abigail says to Bianca, oh, I'm really sorry that I offended you. Please accept my apology. I, as a third person, knowing Abigail, but not knowing Bianca, I could definitely have an opinion. I could think Bianca is overreacting. I could think that Abigail shouldn't have had to apologize to Bianca in the first place. But as a third person who is not actually part of this conversation in the first place, it would just be really inappropriate and strange for me to go up to both of them and say, you know what, I actually don't think she should have been offended in the first place. You shouldn't have had to give her an apology at all. Like, why are you doing this? And for me to say directly to Bianca, a person that I don't know, you know what, you're just being too sensitive. Just get over it. It is entirely up to Bianca to say, yeah, I accept your apology, or no, I don't accept your apology. You could also expand this situation to fit the scenario a little bit better. So let's say myself, Bianca, and Danielle, we have a friendship with Abigail, and Abigail says something potentially offensive to us. Bianca says, that was offensive, I didn't like what you said. I say, that made me feel uncomfortable, but it's not entirely offensive to me. And Danielle says, that was super offensive. How dare you? I don't want to be your friend anymore. And Abigail says to the three of us, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Please accept my apology. Bianca says, I need some time. Let me think about it. I say, okay, fine. I wasn't that offended in the first place. I wasn't comfortable. So I forgive you. And then Danielle says, that was not a sincere apology. I don't accept your apology. And then some stranger who happens to know Abigail and has a relationship with her, but does not know any of the three of us, comes up to the whole gang of us and says, all three of you are just overreacting, get over it. Why were you offended in the first place? And they say to Abigail, well, I don't see how you did anything wrong. These three people are overreacting. That to me would be very inappropriate and very odd. You are witnessing an interaction between someone who has offended someone else. You have no vested interest in their relationship, and yet you want to insert your own opinion as to whether they should be offended or they should not, or they should accept an apology or they should not. So in that sense, that is what a lot of people were trying to say. If you are not the affected group, please don't try to tell us that we should not be offended. Or if you are not the affected group, please stop trying to tell us that we are overreacting. In a real world scenario, if we were individual people, Abigail, Bianca, myself, and Danielle, we could take our conversation into a private space and not have it be publicly discussed. And this other person, let's call her Elizabeth, she could talk to Abigail in private and say, I saw what happened the other day and I didn't think there was anything wrong with what you said, that's fine. So here is my question. Are you Elizabeth in this scenario? So what makes things more complicated in this situation, in my perspective, we are talking about an audience which is witnessing all of these events unfold, a makeup brand and a subsection of its consumers that it has offended. In this day of social media, we are so used to having our opinions being voiced, essentially. However, I would encourage you to not talk over the affected group and listen to the reasoning and not be willfully ignorant of their voices even if you disagree with them. I could very well share the same sentiments as Elizabeth, but me being part of the trio puts me in a better position to discuss the dynamics of our interaction. And the reason why other minority groups are usually treated more favorably in these kinds of discussions is because they are more likely to have experienced that kind of treatment before. In this case, it would be another person. Let's call this person Fatima. And Fatima says, Abigail has said something similar to this to me before. So I can understand your situation. I think if you are looking at things on a broader spectrum and going beyond makeup and the beauty space, I think tensions are running higher, especially in the American discourse about race relations. I don't live in America, but I think globally the exposure to these discourses are, I suppose, disproportionately high. That is not to say these kinds of conversations don't happen in, let's say, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, other places, or even Germany itself. But I think American politics and entertainment and media itself is very much present on the global stage. And that's why it influences a lot of our own conversations. And now more than ever before, I think we are a more international kind of community where these exchange of ideas are happening a lot. A lot of you may not have been to Southeast Asia, to Singapore, to any East Asian dominant country, but you are listening to information and knowledge generated and filtered through my personal lens. I think another issue here is that in today's society, especially on social media, there is a constant feedback of confirmation bias. All the content that I seek out, the content that I consume tends to be curated for me to reinforce my own ideologies and my own, I guess, political values. And I think this definitely makes for a more divisive society. Here's another factor which I think is important to talk about. This is not going to be directly makeup related. This is the reason why people belonging to minority groups, and that includes myself, feel frustrated and not heard and silenced. And this goes back into our history. Now, at this point, this conversation is going to be more sociological, political in nature. So if you're not interested in that kind of conversation, feel free to leave the video. It's up to you. Do what you want. I'm not your mom. I think a lot of people are very familiar with the American political discourse, especially when as it pertains to race relations. I thought it would be interesting to talk about this from a slightly different perspective, basing it off the experiences of the Southeast Asian people during colonization. This was written by Professor Syed Hussein Alatas, first published in 1977. He was a Malaysian sociologist, founder of social science organizations, and politician. Wrote several books on corruption, multiracialism, imperialism, and books pertaining to post-colonialism. This text is written from a sociological perspective. I will link the PDF down below if you're interested in reading it. I personally am doing a master's in sociology at the moment. I studied psychology and sociology for my bachelor's in Singapore. This book is about how the colonial rulers, how they had decided to conquer and invade the nations in Southeast Asia. Essentially, they had done this in order to generate profit for their own economy, in order to reap the benefits of its natural resources and also perhaps the labor from the natives. If you're talking about Singapore, it was a very ideal location geographically because of how it was on the map and based on the established routes of sea trade. So if you didn't already know, the indigenous people of Singapore were not Chinese, they were Malays. Chinese and Indians had come over to Singapore as immigrants in order to seek their fortune because it had become a very profitable trading zone. So in this book, the author talks about how the indigenous people, the Malays, were being discussed essentially by colonial rulers as subjects. They observe the behavior of the people that live in a specific location and they write about the people's habits. Essentially, it was anthropology, but with an ideology that was clearly more racist, because it already assumes that the Western styles of knowledge building, of culture, of behavior are inherently superior to that of the people that they were studying. The ideology of colonial capitalism sought a justification of Western rule in its alleged aim of modernizing and civilizing the societies which had succumbed to Western powers. One of the most spoken ideologists in this region was Thomas Stamford Raffles, the colonial founder of Singapore. Whether it was in Malaysia, the Philippines, or Indonesia, or whether it was the British, the Spaniards, or the Dutch, the same type of arguments prevailed. All three powers were agreed that Western rule and Western culture were superior, that Western peoples should lead the world, that they were the most suited to exploit the natural wealth of the East, and that they were the best administrators. Consequently, the ideology of colonial capitalism played down the capacities of Southeast Asian societies. Every conceivable item was invoked to denigrate the Southeast Asian, including his size and his physiognomy. This particular paragraph, I think, is an interesting part. Here he talks about the differences between minority groups in, for instance, the United States, compared to the groups in colonized areas such as Singapore, the Philippines, and so on. So the other difference is that colonial ethnic prejudice is, as represented by its image of the native, was inflicted by a minority upon the majority. In non-colonial areas, it is the majority which inflicts the prejudice upon the minority. For example, the Negro in the United States or the prejudice against Gypsies and Jews in Europe. Yet another point of difference is that in non-colonial areas of the West, the ethnic or racial stereotype functions as an interactional framework. The Negroes have been conscious of the stereotypes applied to them and they are reacting to them. The white image of the Negro becomes part of the interaction pattern of which both sides are conscious. In the case of the colonial image, it was not part of the conscious interaction pattern of the natives, but only of the European rulers. So this is a quote by Sir Frank Swethenham. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. He was a British colonial administrator who became the first resident general of the Federated Malay States. Swethenham's description refers to the Malays of 1874 in Malaya. He suggested another trait. The leading characteristic of the Malay of every class is a disinclination to work. The Malay of the peninsula was and is unquestionably opposed to steady continuous work. And yet, if you can only give him an interest in the job, he will perform prodigies. He will strive and endure and be cheerful and courageous with the best. So the author is making a comparison between the colonial masters or the colonial rulers' assessment of the behaviors and motivations of a specific ethnic group, in this case the Malays, and also he talks about Javanese, he talks about Filipinos as well. And he's comparing those assessments with their assessment of the Chinese population that came to work in Southeast Asia. So here he really deconstructs everything and gives us more of an understanding. Foreigners have observed that millions of Javanese, Malays, and Filipinos toil. They plant, they fish, they build houses, they look after their farms. In short, they are occupied every day. How was it then that the image of the lazy native developed? The clue is present in the remark made by Winstead. He said, because he is an independent farmer with no need to work for hire, the Malay has got an undeserved reputation for idleness, which his Asiatic competitors took care to foster. It was this unwillingness to become a tool in the production system of colonial capitalism which earned the Malays a reputation for being indolent. This was one factor in the creation of the image of the indolent Malay. Another was the fact that the Malays did not come into close functional contact with the Europeans, who were predominantly concentrated in the urban areas. The Europeans had very little experience of Malays serving them. The Malays were not their pillars of comfort. In the bars, in the rest houses, in the hotels, in the shops, Malays did not serve Europeans. So the next quote is from someone called John Thomson, who was a pioneering Scottish geographer and traveler and was the first known photographer to document the people and landscape of China for publication and dissemination to the Western world. It is indeed to Chinaman that the foreign resident is indebted for almost all his comforts, and for the profusion of luxuries which surrounded the wonderfully European-looking home on this distant land. At the fiat of his master, Ah Hong, the Chinese butler, daily spreads the table with substantial fare, with choice fruits and pleasant flowers, the attributes of that lavish hospitality which is the pride of our merchants in the quarter of the globe. His approval of the Chinese was subject to the Chinese being restrained by British law. In Penang, where there are few or almost no competitors in the various occupations in which the Chinese engage, and where their vices break out in a milder form, the difficulty presses more lightly. There, the Chinese, when properly restrained, are the most useful and most indispensable members of society. True, they smoke opium, they lie without restraint, and whenever opportunity offers are dishonest, cunning, and treacherous. But for all that, those of them who have risen to positions of trust forsake their vices altogether, or, what is more probable, conceal them with Chinese artfulness. So you see in that text, there is already this disparaging kind of judgment towards both Chinese and Malays, assumptions about the industriousness of the Chinese and Malays based on what they could observe. But what they could observe was already filtered through a lens of Western superiority and how well these ethnic groups could serve them in their colonial power and within the framework of their colonial capitalism. The Chinese were considered industrious because they supplied the lowest form of labor. The Malays, despite their positive contribution to the kind of labor noted by the author, were considered indolent, not because they were really indolent, according to the definition, but because they avoided the type of slave labor which the Chinese and the Indians were compelled to do owing to their immigrant status. However, these stereotypes to a certain extent still exist within Singaporean society, even though we are now an independent nation and even though we are no longer under British colonial rule. These ethnic-based stereotypes, although I don't think are as pronounced in today's Singaporean society, I still believe are there embedded in our consciousness. From the beginning of Singapore's independence, there had been lots of policies that restricted freedom of speech and a lot of racial harmony incentives put in place by the ruling party of Singapore. I think to some extent that encouraged us to disregard the inequalities that were present in our society. There always has been this mantra of Singapore being a meritocratic society. So essentially, basically, the harder you work, the more you get rewarded, which is harmful because within society there are always going to be people who have more privileges than others. For instance, income inequality. There's also been this newer term of Chinese privilege, which I think has been extrapolated from the idea of white privilege. So I wanted to give you that example to show you how beyond America there are these experiences and why people in minority groups feel frustration when they are being talked over, when they are being silenced. It is not that you as a white person has no right to an opinion. You obviously do. You can disagree with us. That is entirely up to you. But historically, we have been seen as subjects. We have been talked about. We have been analyzed. And we would like more of our voices to be part of today's knowledge making. I hope you found this video interesting and entertaining in some way. And that's it from me. Ciao for now. I hate using the word white. You're not white. You just, never mind.